I'd heard about it in the newspapers. They were looking for help. And so I spoke to my father about it, and he said, away you go. So got on a train, went to Ontario, and I met a family there that I stayed with wherever I went, Isabel and Joe Morrison. They had one son, and through her, I worked in the shell filling plant at Ajax to begin with, and she moved to where they were making bombs and had me go along, and so. To make the shells, you sat behind glass, and it was a long room, and there was young people working all the way, young girls mainly, and you'd be sitting on this stool, and with your pressing the shells, the gunpowder into the shell, and occasionally they would blow up when you were doing it. The shell, the plate glass protected you. We didn't make a lot of money, but we made money. It was a sort of a monotonous day, doing the same thing over and over and over. Yeah, they were fairly heavy. Like, we just put the shell in there, but then it went into a larger, about that high. And strange things, these shells that I was making, my husband was firing on the battlefield.
Would you have, obviously he wasn't your husband at that time, would you have made that connection while you were making the shells? Did you know sort of what John was doing at that time?
Well, sort of yes and no. We wrote letters. Probably about 6 to 9 months. As soon as I was 18, I joined the Army in Toronto. I think it probably had a lot to do with my father, and to get off the farm. Just wanted to do something. When you're a teenager, you don't really think that much about helping others. You're trying to help yourself. Agree? Well, the uniform, that was the first thing, being fitted into a uniform, and then you were in. That was important.
What about the training?
Well, I started out taking office work, doing that, and it was so boring. So I got into driving. I forget now how long that course was. It was quite a while. And they taught us how to drive just about everything. And sent out to a place that needed a driver. Well, you were taught everything about driving a car, from the tires and putting fuel in and so on, but never really had to do that because those vehicles were in good shape.
Part of your training was the marching, so you had to...
Oh, yes.
Can you talk about that?
Well, it was fun to march, and it came in very useful to me. A few years ago, I joined the Lower Mainland Color Party. I was marching in all the parades.
About the training.
Well, my training in the Army has served me well during my life. You never got up without making your bed, never left it unmade, and consequently, some of the children picked that up too. And you never left a mess. No, I loved it. Well, I loved to get in those vehicles, and drove a lot of Jeeps and later on cars, and meet I was sent to Halifax after my training. would meet the ships coming in, that sort of thing. It was quite interesting. And then bringing the boys back from war from England. It was quite interesting. I taught all my children to drive except the last one, and my nerves had shot by then. They'd get so close to hitting another vehicle, and I've just given it up. The Army vehicles were not that great, especially during the war. Pretty heavy, junky. The Jeeps were probably the favorite, and they were all open. You'd be driving along. He came from a large German family. I think there were about 14 in the family, and they were all hardworking Germans. And he worked on the farm for my dad, and also his father. And a very good-looking fellow, blonde, bluish-green eyes. Yeah. And he was called up to go overseas, and he went through the France, Belgium, Germany, Holland, went through the whole bit. They were still fighting in Holland when the war was over, and they didn't know it. He was 6 years older than me. Well, I think that they should think about those that have gone on ahead and not made it. Just want things to be better and help where they can.
Those people who gave their lives for
Yes.
our country.
Like in thousands upon thousands have. I don't think much of the police now who just go around shooting people don't behave. I'm watching too much television. Well, he was a volunteer too, and he named the district and was well known throughout. He was one of the, I guess they called him a trustee or something like that. He came to Canada as a late teenager, and then when Canada went to war, he joined the Canadian Army and went overseas, and where he was wounded almost immediately, as so many were. He was very fortunate. So many were killed, but he was badly wounded and was sent to a hospital in Scotland where he recovered. And he didn't really talk about the war, but he had holes all, like in those days there was no bathtubs, he did sponge baths, and his back was full of holes, and as children we used to put our fingers in these holes, and he would just laugh, but never tell us what it was all about. The whole back was covered. He fought Vimy. He never talked about that. Well, have you got any suggestions?
I was hoping to cheat off of your answer. Yeah.
Well, for me, life has been very good. I'm very happy with my family, and just want the best for them. If help is needed, get in there and do it.
One of the things with regard to my childhood on the farm was the fact that I guess it would be the government of Canada asked that people collect bones, dried animal bones, and aluminum. So we used to scurry about the countryside collecting these bones because there had been a lot of antelope, and I'm not sure about buffalo in the area, but the bones being the dry country that it was, the bones quite well preserved. So these bones and any aluminum that we could possibly recover from old cars that had been, and machinery that had been left in the ditches, we would gather up, and I guess our dad would take them into the elevator, which was the collection area for this process. And these bones and aluminum, they went to, I would think, to the Toronto area, to a munitions factory, because they were gathering up everything possible that they could turn into munitions. So it must have been quite a successful program. And at the same time, we were on rations, but very small, because we grew everything that we ate. But we were rationed to sugar, and we were given stamps. And I guess when you went into the local town, Mr. Smith's grocery, they had to give a stamp, and then you were allowed so much sugar, because they were sugar, of course, was going towards the munitions end of things. And so I don't remember too much about that, but I remember Mother being very careful that we all had our own share. And we had 6 jars of sugar on the counter, and we would have competitions as to who could eat less, not more, but less. And at the same time, I was thinking that some of the older farm boys in the area joined the services. There were quite a number of them, as a matter of fact, and all of them, as I recall, came back safely and settled back in on the farms. And at that point, they were a few years older, so wanted their own homes, and they were assisted by the Department of Veterans Affairs to buy land and settle at that time. I don't know why that was. I guess I just happened, that's the power of advertising. I just happened to see the ad in the Vancouver Sun, I guess. And then once you're in with the Navy, you're so proud of it, and there's considerable competition, so, you know, you put all your efforts into that. And so I never gave any thought about that. Many girls like to join different things because of the uniforms. Well, the Navy was the least attractive. When I was at HMCS Star, it was summertime, and knowing the Great Lakes in summer, it's very, very hot and humid, even though the base was right on the water. And we were issued dresses that had been issued during World War II, and they were just a plain lightweight material with gold buttons down the front and a white collar and cuffs that you had to wash every night and iron and put back on the sleeves. And these dresses were so unattractive. The seamen at the gate used to call us the home for wayward girls. So you can picture that. So anyway, I would have never thought anything of joining the Army, or no disrespect, or Air Force. I was still working in the bank, of course, and I was to appear every Tuesday night to finally start my career in the Navy. So I did that, and eventually we were issued uniforms, and the uniforms were, we were very fortunate in there was a lot of leftover supplies from World War II, which had finished several years prior, but the quality of everything was good. It didn't fit, but that was all right. That didn't seem to matter. And the first thing, of course, we were told we learned was marching and keeping our heads up and don't scratch your nose or anything like that. And we were taught by the ex-chiefs chief petty officers that had served in the Navy, so they were not exactly, they were nice old men at the time. That's not the right way to say it, but they were also very kind and very helpful. So we gradually moved on. There'd be one course after another, but basically all evenings were started with marching and precision, and we learned to salute, of course, and then eventually, as time passed, the first requirement is to take basic training, and the basic training then was HMCS Cornwallis for everyone. So we went by train to Cornwallis, which was, I would never have gotten there otherwise, I guess, but we had the usual, again, more marching and basic courses in the rules and roads of the Navy. And I think that went well, and when we came back, we were back at Discovery, and I was enrolled in the TAS department, which was torpedo anti-submarine control, and we were taught by the various sailors on what that was, which was underwater radar. And that took place all of the first winter, I guess it was. Then the second year, there was an opening several openings for Wrens that wanted to volunteer for special duty at HMCS Star in Hamilton, Ontario. And that was conned, which was the head office of the Naval Reserves for all of Canada. At that time, we had 23 Naval Reserve depots across Canada, like Edmonton, Calgary, Saskatoon, Regina, Winnipeg, and several in Manitoba, and several in Quebec, and the Maritimes, of course. So my next trip was to HMCS Stadacona for further training, and we were actually taken out onto the areas where the men had trained during the war, which was detecting ships that came into Bedford Basin. And I think we'd go out for the day and take along they'd give us cooks who gave us wonderful hefty meals, and therefore thus went Stadacona. They were quite strict there, and a lot of high-ranking men of the Navy were stationed, of course, in Halifax, because at that point the threat of hostilities in the Pacific were still very evident in the theater of war over there, so we would be taken on, our sea time was day trips on one of the small HMCS ships out into the Great Lakes. Well, that was great for us, we thought. We'd sunbathe on the deck. And so I spent several months at HMCS Star and then came back to Vancouver and carried out I did make one more trip back to Stadacona for training because at that point I had the TAS division for the Wrens was discontinued, and I went into the meteorology department, which was starting out very new, and of course meteorology then was very, very basic, but it was very interesting, and I really liked that. But my 5-year term had come to an end. Also, by that time, I was married, so it wasn't always just so easy to get away and take the required 2 weeks training, which would have taken place over at HMCS Naden in Victoria, or be sent east. So at that point, I left the Navy. I think it gave me more confidence. I've always been quite shy around people and coming forward. And but it gave me confidence. That's the most thing, and it widens your. Like, I knew nothing about the military, but I've certainly over the years become very aware of it and keep up to it to this very day as to what is going on, because it's amazing. A number of people, if you mention something and they just have no idea what you're talking about there. So it broadens one's mind tremendously, I feel, when you know what's going on in other parts of the world. And there's lots going on. Over the years, I've done a lot, quite a few very interesting things. For 10 years, I coordinated the veterans' visits to the schools in West Vancouver. There are 17 schools there were at that time that the veterans visited, and the principals of the school would invite the veterans and to attend the assemblies that each school would have. When I first started, started doing this was 1998, I had at least 200 members that I could draw on to cover all of the schools, and I was able to do that. But as the years passed, the veterans became scarcer, and there were very few people. But so at the end of my tenure of the 10 years that I did it, there were very few people, but they did carry on sort of volunteering on their own. If they had grandchildren or children going to that particular school, they would do it on their own. So unfortunately, they could not do it the way we were able to do it in the early days. But it was very rewarding, because we would speak to in some cases, speak to the children, and they would listen and were very interested, most of them. And because so often they had grandparents that had been in the military, so they would know slightly about the military. And I also, my husband was sergeant at arms of the color party there, and I was soon just handed a flag and said, become part of it, which I did. I enjoyed it. We would attend parades and memorial services for a lot of the veterans, which was not an honor to do it, but sad occasions, and church services occasionally, and parades, of course, and various events that would happen around the city. The color party would be called, and there again, there was a great number of us. When I first started, there would have been at least 20 to call on, but as time went on, it changed, and now, which is a very fine thing to do, they have to rely on many of the older cadets from the various services. Other than that, I just enjoyed helping the Legion on any committee I could do, and I helped my husband a great deal. He was membership chairman and set up the new membership from a pencil and paper system to the new computer system that they still use today, I believe. I think they should be thinking of how they got there. Nowadays it's so different with the new age and the electronics, that they should be thinking back of where did they come from. And it seems to me that you don't do that until you're much older. Then you start thinking that where your parents come from. But I think to be able to reflect back and remember about their dad and their granddad and great-grandfather is very important. just to be remembered as a good person, I think. That's all I can think of. I've spent my life looking after people, so that's all I think I want to be remembered by. I'm a very independent person, and I'm going to look after myself till the last breath, I think. I don't, like, everybody offers to do things, and I thank them very much. That's very nice, but I'll carry on and do it my way. I just saw something, this is off the track, about the lady that married the first wife of Ernest Hemingway. She was a very well-known and first woman war correspondent at World War I. And they said, you don't say no to her, and if you do, she doesn't listen anyway. So I'm something like that. It's always been with me, right from the day I was born, I think it was. And I sort of thought everything on my own. And if ever I was sort of in trouble, like throughout my adult life even, I can always think of 2 or 3 things to get me out of that trouble. I don't just throw my hands in the air and give up. I don't think it's not. I think it's because I've been on my own, quite a bit. So you have to do your own thinking. I have nobody to say, to get advice from, which I probably wouldn't listen to anyway.